The phone call that could redraw the map of North America happened at 11:47 p.m. last Tuesday, and nobody in Washington even knows it occurred. I've spent 50 years studying how empires collapse, how territorial arrangements that seem permanent suddenly become negotiable when power balances shift. But what I learned from a source inside Mexico's foreign ministry this week stopped me cold. For the first time since 1848, Mexico is seriously exploring legal mechanisms to challenge American sovereignty over half of what we call the American Southwest. This isn't some academic exercise or symbolic gesture. This is strategic planning by a nation that has quietly accumulated more leverage over the United States than any foreign power since Britain in 1812. And the most shocking part? America might be too weak, too divided, and too economically dependent to resist. Let me tell you what's really happening, because the mainstream media won't report this story until it's too late to matter. While Americans argue about pronouns and election fraud, Mexico has been building a case that could legally invalidate the entire territorial foundation of the American Southwest under modern international law. The document I saw through intelligence contacts contains legal analysis that would terrify anyone who understands how international arbitration actually works. Mexico's lawyers have identified three fatal flaws in America's territorial claims that didn't matter when we had overwhelming power, but become explosive vulnerabilities in our current weakened state. First, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed under what international law now recognizes as duress and coercion. We invaded Mexico, occupied their capital, threatened complete annexation, then demanded half their territory in exchange for withdrawing our armies. Under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, which the United States helped write and ratify, such agreements are legally void from the moment of signing. But here's what makes this truly dangerous for American interests. The legal precedent has already been established. The International Court of Justice has repeatedly ruled that treaties signed under military occupation lack validity. Just last year, they invalidated territorial arrangements in Eastern Europe using precisely the legal framework that could apply to the Mexican territories we seized in 1848. Mexico doesn't need to win a war to reclaim lost territories. They need only to make maintaining current arrangements more costly than negotiating new ones. And given America's internal divisions, economic vulnerabilities, and international isolation, that threshold may have already been crossed. The second vulnerability is demographic, and this is where American strategic planners should be losing sleep. The populations of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas include over 30 million people of Mexican heritage who were never consulted about their political status. Under contemporary international law, peoples have the right to determine their sovereignty through referenda. You cannot support Ukrainian self-determination while denying it to historical communities within your own borders. The contradiction is too obvious, too legally indefensible. If Crimeans can vote on their political status, if Kosovars can declare independence, if Catalonians can demand referenda, why can't the people of the Southwest choose their political future? But the third vulnerability is what keeps me awake at night, because it reveals how completely the power relationship between Mexico and America has transformed. We are now economically dependent on Mexico in ways that would have been unthinkable during our era of dominance. Mexico has become America's primary supplier of automobiles, fresh produce, and increasingly sophisticated technology. If Mexico decided to slow production even minimally, American supply chains would collapse within days. Automotive factories would shut down within hours. This isn't the relationship between a hegemon and a subordinate. This is the relationship between a debtor and a creditor. I learned this firsthand during a visit to Detroit last month. General Motors executives privately admitted that their entire North American production depends on Mexican factories, Mexican workers, and Mexican components. Ford's largest truck plant would stop functioning within 48 hours if Mexico decided to prioritize domestic markets over American exports. The economic integration has become so complete that political boundaries have become economically irrational. Mexican workers, Mexican capital, Mexican energy, and Mexican products have become the foundation of the American Southwest's economy. When economic logic contradicts political boundaries, economic logic usually wins. The perfect storm is converging in ways that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. America's internal fracturing has reached levels not seen since the Civil War. Half the country considers the other half illegitimate. 30 states regularly challenge federal authority on issues ranging from immigration to health care to election administration. This internal weakness creates opportunities that external actors can exploit. When a superpower cannot maintain unity at home, it cannot project credible strength abroad. When citizens question their own government's legitimacy, they're unlikely to support aggressive defense of territorial claims based on 19th century conquests that many now view as morally indefensible. The global context has shifted decisively against American territorial claims. Rising powers view challenges to American control as low-cost, high-impact opportunities to weaken American hegemony without direct military confrontation. China, Russia, India, and Brazil don't need to support Mexican territorial claims out of principle. They can support them out of strategic interest in fragmenting American power. International institutions now provide legal mechanisms for challenging historical injustices that had no remedy in the 19th century. The International Court of Justice, regional arbitration bodies, and human rights tribunals offer forums where Mexico could present evidence of coercive treaty making and demand territorial adjustments. American military capacity to resist such challenges has been fundamentally degraded. We're experiencing the worst recruitment crisis in 50 years. Our forces are globally dispersed across multiple fronts: China containment, Russia deterrence, Middle East interventions. Opening an additional front along the southern border would be strategic suicide, especially given the impossibility of using force against populations that include millions of American citizens. The narrative monopoly that protected American territorial claims for over a century has been shattered. What was once portrayed as manifest destiny is increasingly understood as imperialist conquest. Global opinion favors decolonization and self-determination over maintenance of historical conquest. I've been tracking how Mexico's strategic thinking has evolved through contacts in their academic and policy communities. They're not planning military confrontation. They're planning legal warfare, demographic mobilization, and economic pressure designed to make American territorial control too costly to maintain. The strategy is sophisticated and patient. International arbitration to challenge the fundamental validity of the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty. Referenda demanded for populations within disputed territories. Regional organizations asked to mediate disputes over resource access and water rights that ignore historical boundaries. America would be forced to defend the indefensible in public forums, arguing that military conquest creates permanent territorial rights, would align us with 19th century imperialism rather than 21st century international law. Claiming that referenda shouldn't apply to historical communities would contradict our support for self-determination elsewhere. The resources within the disputed territories have become even more critical in the 21st century economy. Nevada's lithium reserves are essential for electric vehicle production. Southwestern water sources are crucial for agriculture and urban development. Texas oil infrastructure remains vital for energy security. If Mexico were to challenge sovereignty over these territories, it would threaten the foundation of America's energy transition and water security at exactly the moment when both have become national security priorities. The domino effect potential terrifies American strategists who understand imperial dynamics. If the 1848 annexations can be challenged, so can the 1898 annexation of Hawaii. Native American nations could question treaty violations on a scale that makes current tribal sovereignty discussions seem minor. Pacific Island territories could demand referenda on their political status. The entire imperial narrative could begin to fracture once legal challenges to foundational territorial arrangements gain international support and legitimacy. Mexican culture, demographics, and economic influence are reshaping the Southwest regardless of political boundaries. Language, customs, economic relationships, and family connections increasingly operate according to Mexican rather than American patterns. Political boundaries that contradict cultural and economic realities become unsustainable over time. The cost of maintaining the territorial status quo is becoming prohibitive. Internal resistance to federal authority is growing. Economic dependence on Mexico is increasing. International support for American territorial claims is declining. Military resources are overstretched globally. Every trend favors greater integration with Mexico rather than continued political separation. When maintaining conquest becomes more expensive than negotiating partnership, even superpowers must choose pragmatism over pride. American strategic thinking remains trapped in assumptions about permanent dominance that no longer reflect reality. Military superiority cannot solve political problems rooted in moral illegitimacy and economic dependence. Demographic trends cannot be reversed through legal restrictions. Cultural influence cannot be contained by physical barriers. Mexico's time may have come not through military victory, but through patient accumulation of legal, economic, and demographic advantages that make continued American dominance unsustainable. The stolen lands could be reclaimed not through war, but through the inexorable logic of shifting power in a multipolar world. History moves slowly until it moves suddenly. The foundations of American territorial control, which seemed unshakable for generations, are beginning to shift in ways that would have been unthinkable during our era of unchallenged hegemony. The question facing American leadership is whether they have the wisdom to negotiate while they still have something to offer, or whether they will cling to unsustainable positions until they have no choice but to surrender what they cannot defend. The crack has opened. The map of North America was drawn by 19th century military conquest. It may be redrawn by 21st century legal, economic, and demographic realities that the original conquerors never anticipated. Mexico is no longer seeking permission. For the first time in 170 years, they're in a position to set terms.